Esoteric History of the Pyrenees, an overview. So we just had the Mary Magdalene conference up in Alet, where we had speakers and people coming talking in detail about Mary Magdalene. What we thought we'd do this year, and I discussed it with Amanda and stuff, is have a more general topic. So not everyone's going to talk about Mary Magdalene exclusively, like Tory Bain. It's relevant, but it's not a Mary Magdalene conference. What we're trying to do is look at the Pyrenees, this extraordinary region. And I've done quite a lot of research on that, which I'm going to share with you. I came to this region when I was a little boy. My mother brought the family to France every summer for 2 weeks. And one time we went to Collioure, and I remember she used to drag us around the Picasso Museum and up to the Pyrenees to show us Mount Canigou. And later I've discovered why this is important, and interesting. And then, so I want to start with a story about esoteric and Gnostic philosophy. This is a true story. There was a bishop called Priscillian who lived in the 300s, and he was sort of late 300s, early 400s, I think, who was in Hispania, Galicia. He was Celtic, Spanish, and he was kind of a druid. He used to, although he was the Christian bishop of his city, he advocated that men and women should go on monastic retreats in the mountains together. They should walk bare feet. They should study the Gospels. They should try and live out the teachings. They should look for the inner meanings. He advocated they should study pagan philosophy. If they didn't read Plato and understand the classics, they couldn't really be proper Christians. And he was essentially, he believed in reincarnation, like Plato did. He was a very deep thinker. And lo and behold, he was accused of heresy by the kind of officialdom of the day, who then had words with the emperor, who was in Germany, in Trier, around there. And they hauled him before the emperor to judge the secular power to judge a spiritual person's belief system. The church of the day was split. The saints, like Saint Martin of Tours, said, you can't do this man is just a mystic. He let him walk barefoot in the hills. We need people like that in the church. These are the true Christians. But the officials said, no, he's a heretic. He's teaching reincarnation. He's teaching men and women should go on retreats together. They should do fasting on a Sunday, etc. So they actually hauled him before the thing. He was tried, it was a fake trial, and he was sentenced to death. And he was beheaded. And it's the first heresy trial and conviction in European Christian history. This was the first time a thinker, a mystic, was accused of heresy and then killed. And it opened the floodgates to what happened later with the persecutions of this region, which I'll be talking about shortly. And I was very interested that he had this Celtic dimension. He was essentially a Christian druid, which is kind of what I am. And I've also been fasting on Sundays ever since Brexit was announced, as my little spiritual protest against it. And then I read that Priscillian used to fast on Sundays, and that's one of the things he was accused of heresy for. And then I discovered something very interesting, is there is some speculation among modern scholars who have gone into his teachings. They've recently discovered some of his writings, which scholars have been reading. There's nothing in there that's heretical. It's probably the Anglican vicar in this town would love this guy, right? Certainly the Anglican vicars I've known would. What was so shocking, I think, is that the secular power took upon itself the right to inquire into our consciences and our beliefs. And so what's now said, and this is contemporary research I'm sharing with you, you can go away and study it. In Compostela, Santiago de Compostela, the greatest pilgrimage route in Christendom, they all pilgrimage to see a saint's tomb, which is supposed to be St. James the Great, brother of St. John, the Apostle of God. Now people are saying they think it's Priscillian's body in that tomb. Somehow his followers secretly got him to Santiago de Compostela, and he's actually buried there. And I think that's really neat. That's like the heretic's revenge against orthodoxy. If it could be proven, and one could do DNA tests on the tomb, that actually it's Priscillian that these millions of Catholic pilgrims have been going to for the last.
Well, it's actually a small box. With
You've been?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
And
Okay.
it's on an altar underneath the altar, the
Right.
main altar. And it's a silver and gold box,
Right.
about this big by this big.
Okay.
And it could easily be an ossuary.
Yeah, it could have been.
It could
yeah.
be more
Could be
than
Priscillian.
one person.
Okay. Well, I think they should do tests, and I just think that there's an irony here I wanted to share with you, because I think that's neat. Anyway, I want to start with this poor man and his story, and that's going to lead on to the next point, which is really why is Europe so anti-Gnostic, anti-esoteric? Why do people have a hard time? Why do they get persecuted for heresy if they have psychic gifts, etc.? You know, okay, you can get away with it in California, there's lots of places you can't, okay? And so there seems to be this tradition in Europe of suppressing esoteric spirituality. Conventional religion's fine, you can go to the synagogue, the mosque, you can wear the costumes, you can be an official of a religion, that's fine. But if you want to penetrate to the depths, you know, they'll all accuse you of heresy, right? And there's a very famous scholar, great influence on me, called Giles Crystal. He was a Dutch New Testament theologian who worked on the Gospel of Thomas. He was a friend of Carl Jung. He was a very great scholar. He was a friend of the Queen of Holland. And he said the Gnostic tradition is Europe's third tradition of Christianity. There's Catholics, Orthodox, and then there's Gnostic and Protestant. You know, there's four. But the Gnostic one is actually, he reckons, is the original one. It's the source, and so why have we neglected it? Okay, so this region didn't neglect it. That's what's so interesting about this part of Europe. It bubbled up. There's speculation that Priscillian's disciples who scattered to the hills carried on his teachings and laid the seedbed of what later became the Catholic tradition. There's many overlaps. And so when the Catholic tradition developed, now how and when did that first start? Was it brought by missionaries from the Manichaeans, which is what my professor friend was going to say this afternoon? Or was it like homegrown, or as some people say, was it brought by Mary Magdalene and the original diaspora? Or was it a bit of all three? You know, there are question marks about where that Gnostic tradition came from and why here. I have speculation that the Pyrenees are a cosmopolitan gateway between France and Spain. They have an international job to do in world history. And they've always been a meeting point for different cultures. So you have your Catalan culture, you have the Basques, you have Celtic traditions a lot in this region. You have the ancient Greeks coming, you have the Romans turn up, you have the Iberian Hispanics, and before that you had the Carthaginians, Phoenicians. You know, and the Visigoths, thank you. So, and the Pyrenees was like a route they all passed through. So there's this international perspective, I think, which makes this region, because to me, true Gnosticism is about cosmopolitan access to universalism. It's about not being comfortable with being a box or a label. It's about being spirit-led rather than label-led. So in medieval times, scholars would go from France down to Spain to study with the Sufis, with the Islamic teachers. And some would come back. So the University of Montpellier was helped to be founded by Islamic scholars very early on, in 980 or something. I'll talk about that a bit later. So that's my thesis. It's a crossroads, Pyrenees, onto a wider world. Okay, Another topic that's interesting for esotericists is the question of the Holy Grail. There are a lot of people that have been looking for the Holy Grail. They say it's in this area. They identify Montségur with, the castle where it's supposed to be secreted, Montsalvat, which Wagner wove into his opera Parsifal. And there have been a lot of esoteric teachers, Jules Douanel, Josephine Pelledin, and most recently the Michael Bajan, Richard Lee and Henry Lincoln, but even Simone Weil, who was a great mystic Christian, she also came here and was interested in Holy Grail. Welcome. Come join us. Wait, say anything. Yeah. Okay. And recently there's been some new research by a woman who was married to the son of Charlie Chaplin, an amazing woman, Patrice Chaplin, who has made links between Rennes Chateau and Girona in Spain, which was a great Kabbalistic centre of esoteric Jewish thought. And she has made some amazing links. I mean, I did actually invite her to come, obviously it's such short notice. It would have been lovely if she could have come and spoken, but next year maybe. And her view is, the Holy Grail is the esoteric lineage of Kabbalistic Jewish Christian gnosis, which was embodied in individuals throughout history, like Mary Magdalene. But it's not their property, it's a spiritual thing you pass on. And that there is a group that practice Kabbalah in Girona that know this and consciously work with it, and open portals in the Pyrenees and stuff. So she's done some fascinating research. Okay, again, another reason why here, and you can think of this talk like a sort of like a pentagram with many facets to it. There's no one point that's more important than all the others. You have to join all the dots up at the end. So I'm arguing the tradition is important because it goes back to the ancient Paleolithic people, our ancestors who lived here thousands and thousands of years ago, before writing, but they had speech, they had spiritual searching. We know from their grave arrangements and so on, they believed in the afterlife, and they were, if you believe the work of contemporary scholars, anthropologists who looked at these things, they were practicing out-of-body experiences, trance work, using sometimes psychoactive substances, sometimes just drumming and candlelight. So they were like human, like us. That's what we like doing. In the summer everybody goes off drumming and dancing. It's plus ça change, okay? So the goddess tradition has been flourishing here for tens of thousands of years. And when I went around the Napoleonic era National Museum of Archaeology at Saint-Germain-en-Laye near Paris, which I strongly recommend, they've got many of the finds from the cave people of this area up in Paris. And little goddess figurines and so on. These people were like esoteric masters and shamans and wizards and so on, way back. And if you believe in reincarnation, then they keep reincarnating. That's the pattern that's been made. And also, they found a lot of cave bears in this area. The Pyrenees was full of cave bears, which was man's both greatest teacher and most feared enemy. When cave bears reared up, they were like 10 feet tall, and you couldn't they were huge and powerful. And our ancestors learned how to kill them, but it was a huge effort. And when they did, it was like they worshipped them. So they would do a ritual using the bear skulls, and they found there are people that are working on this, anthropologists who've gone off to study Siberian tribes in the Amur River Valley who also worship the bear. And it's thought that the Paleolithic peoples of the whole circumpolar region from Alaska, Siberia, all the way around, had this tradition of bear worship. And this is the origin of the Arthurian tradition, because Arthur is the bear in Celtic. And the Celtic peoples had exactly the same thing. And it descends from these prehistoric Paleolithic tribes who were living here in the Pyrenees, practicing this. Why did they worship the bear? And it was a bear goddess they worshipped as well as the bear. And this is the origin of the names for a lot of Celtic cities like Bern, Berlin, and others. These are the places of the bear. The bear represented the force of nature, the incredible power that we humans had to learn to overcome, and yet also worship. And there are some tribes that said, we humans are descended from the bears, because they look human. You know, when you talk to a bear, they're like really human. There's speculation that the so-called yetis are actually kind of bear-type creatures. So anyway, I just throw that in, that this was a bear-worshipping region with the bear goddess in Paleolithic times. Okay, so the other thing that fascinates me about this region is this Jewish kingdom of Septimania, as it's called, centered on Narbonne. The legend is that it was at the time of the Muslim conquest of Spain, and Muslim armies had conquered, like southern France. They controlled Narbonne, and the Franks wanted to capture this region. So they sent an army, Pepin, who was then ruling the Frankish Empire, tried to capture Narbonne, but it took him months, I think a couple of years, and he couldn't get in. It was too well defended. So he sent a message into the Jewish community in the city, who were plentiful and numbered and highly thought of, and said, look, do you mind opening the back door for us? We'll give you 50,000 francs. And the Jews said, no, that's shocking. We wouldn't betray our Muslim friends. We've lived among them for hundreds of years. That's disgraceful. So Pepin thought about it and said, okay, would you do it if we allow you to have a whole kingdom and we say that you can rule it as a Jewish little kingdom here? And they thought about it and they said, yes, okay. And they opened the back door, and the Franks conquered Narbonne finally. This is historical. And he kept his word. He let a little Jewish state be set up. The understanding was, the agreement was, that the ruler would have to be an actual son of David, a descendant of the tribe of King David, of Judah. And so the Jews of Narbonne sent for a Jewish prince from Baghdad who could prove he was the son of David, descendant. And he came and ruled Narbonne. This seems to be factual, although some people doubt this. There's lots of controversy, as always is among scholars. And then the tradition says that prince of Judah then intermarried into Charlemagne's line. So the reason the Franks wanted that stipulation was that they could then claim that their kings were going to be descended from David in a direct lineage. So, you know, that's one thing that's interesting about this Jewish kingdom, which is like, is that true or not? It needs to be found out. What is true is that there were an amazing lot of Jewish intellectuals, not just in Narbonne and this region, but also just over the Pyrenees in Girona, which was a world important centre for the Kabbalah. When the Crusaders captured Jerusalem, they did something shocking and terrible, in my opinion. They slaughtered every single Muslim and every single Jew that they found in the city, right? Like in cold blood. And Jerusalem ran and washed with blood. Now, if somebody thinks that's progress or that's God's will, I'm afraid I part company on that point. You know, that if you think that Christ would have wanted that nonsense, I think Christ is very happy that Jews, Christians, and Muslims coexist in peace and have conferences like we're doing, you know. But no, Crusaders did all the slaughtering. And the Jewish religion was tottering what its survival was. And it revived through the work of this particular rabbi called Nachmanides, who was from Girona, and who lived in the exact dates, at that time, about 1100 to 1200. Jerusalem was captured in 1099, I think. But he said, no, we're going to survive, and he did a commentary on the Torah. He was a learned rabbi. And he said, we're going to revive Judaism with scholarship, with truth-seeking. And his commentary is still read to this day in Jewish households. They'll have a copy of it. But he also said, we'll also do it with spirituality with the Kabbalah. And he was deeply versed in it, because it was just surfacing the Kabbalah. It was being written down by Moses de Leon a bit later. And this man, Nachmanides, wrote, Kabbalistic treatises that are priceless, precious as gold. And there's a very interesting story connected with him. He lived from 1194 to 1270. He lived in different parts of Spain, but mostly in Girona. And the Dominicans hated him because he was, an intellectual and not Christian. And they challenged him to a public debate in front of the king. They thought they were going to demolish his philosophy and convert him to Christianity. Now, don't forget, the Dominicans had been founded to destroy the Cathars, who were esotericists. They were the hounds of God, they used to call themselves, and they later served as the Inquisition, right? So they had this discussion. Can you imagine how intense this was? In front of the King of Spain. And the disputes were whether the Messiah has already appeared, whether the Messiah announced by the prophets was to be considered as divine or as a man born of human parents, and whether the Jews or the Christians were in possession of the true faith. Now, Nachmanides argued that the biblical prophets regarded the future Messiah as a human. She would be a person of flesh and blood, not divine in a way that Christians view Jesus. That's not in the text. He stated that their promise was of a reign of universal peace and justice, and this had not been fulfilled by Christianity. Since the appearance of Jesus, the world has been filled with violence and injustice, and that among all the denominations, the Christians are the most warlike. This is what he said in front of the King of Spain. Now, the King of Spain was very interested in this and listened for 3 days. And at the end, he dismissed the Dominicans and gave Nachmanides a prize, a present, and he said of him, he's the most learned man I've ever heard, with the most brilliant arguments, who is nevertheless wrong. So he had to say that because he's the Christian King of Spain. Right? But then and then the Dominicans, even though they'd lost the debate, the Dominicans, of course, pulled strings. They went to ministers, they went to the official heresy-bashing department of the Spanish crown, and they wangled it so he was forced out of Spain anyway. He won the debate, but he had to be exiled. So what he did was he exiled himself to Jerusalem, and he set up a synagogue, and he continued teaching. And there was only a tiny little group of Jews left in Jerusalem. They'd all been slaughtered by the Crusaders. And he gathered the first active synagogue back in Jerusalem, which is still going to this day in the old city. The Nachmanides synagogue is still there, and they revere this guy as the reviver and saviour of the Jewish faith, and the one that saw off the Dominicans. So anyway, and all this is going on here in just the other side of the Pyrenees and here in this region. It was interesting. Nicholas saw was coming down the Star of David on the Abbey windows. Why is that there? I'm sure there were some interesting discussions here in this town in these ancient times.
This town became very wealthy because of the Jews living here.
Oh, really?
The Jews were taxed in order to have businesses and property here.
Okay.
So one of the roads within the village, there's one road that is called Rue Julienne.
Okay.
So the church,
Jewish people lived there, yeah.
Yes.
Mm.
And there's the legend of Nostradamus, and of course his family were originally Jewish.
Mm.
And were forced to convert to Catholicism, but the whole...
And did he come, or he visited you, or he...
Nostradamus' grandparents
were from
Alet. This is the legend. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. But there
Okay.
was a very, very large Jewish community here.
Right.
That came. There were two lots of diasporas. The first after the destruction of the first temple, and
Right.
the second diaspora was after the crucifixion of Christ.
Mm.
Again, this is
What is said? Yeah.
This is what is said. This is legend in the village.
Sure.
Yeah,
well, it would have been after the Roman-Jewish wars in 70 AD, after the Punjab, when they were all forced out of.
And Jerusalem.
Yeah. That's fascinating. Okay, moving on, I want to talk about the Pyrenees in classical times. And what are the Pyrenees? Why are they named that? Well, they're named after a goddess, essentially, called Pyrenee, who was the daughter of a local important king, Beblicius. And Hercules, who came travelling on his 12 labours during the quest, right? He ended up here. Now this is very interesting because Hercules was an amazing figure, very important in Greek and Roman mythology, but also in Celtic mythology. And this whole region, Gaul, etc., because it's Herculean in size. The story is that Hercules fell in love with this girl, Pyrenee. They had an absolutely passionate, summer romance, right? And then he had to go on his way, on his labour, right? As one does, as the heroes often do. But she was broken-hearted, she was pregnant, and she, of course, wanted Hercules to stay and be a family man and raise the baby, like women often want to, So she was broken-hearted. And, but anyway, she, consumed by shame and unable to tell her father, she left the palace and ran into the woods, where she was attacked by a wild bear, says the story. Hercules heard her screams, echoing across the distance between them, and rushed to her aid, but he was too late to save her, and she died in his arms. So distraught, Hercules carried Pyrenee's broken body back to her father's palace, and he buried her body in front of the throne. And the grieving Hercules gathered all the rocks from the plain of Toulouse and piled them up to create a lasting monument to her memory. And that is what Pyrenees mountains are. Hercules gathered so many rocks, he piled up the mountain range, which covers her tomb, the Pyrenees. So the whole landscape, a sacred landscape, to this lost love of Hercules. Now, that's very interesting. Also, Hercules turns out to be the ancestor of Celtus, according to the Greeks and the Romans, and the Celtic tribes are descended from Hercules as well. So there's something we would say Herculean about this area, and perhaps this is part of the mythology. Another point I want to make, which has interested me, is some of you may have read this book by Emmanuel Leroy-Ladurin, French historian, called Montaillou. It's based on a village not far from here. The records of the Inquisition was a Cathar village, and the Inquisition interviewed all the members of this village in depth between 1294 and 1324, so at the end of the Cathar period. But it was still flourishing in the mountain villages, which Montaillou is. And lo and behold, they found some heretics. Some of the priests who were supposed to be Catholic priests were actually Cathars. And we know the records because the man that was the chief inquisitor, who was the Bishop of Pamiers, Jacques Fournier, he kept all these meticulous binders from the Inquisition. They interviewed, what were your dreams? What's your diet like? What's your sex life? Do you believe in the Trinity? Do you believe in the Virgin Mary, and all these points of doctrine were written down in fine complex handwork. They used Latin. And when this man later became the Pope, this man Jacques Fournier, and he took these bound volumes with him to Avignon, which was the papal palace, and he made sure they were in the library. He was very proud of his work. It was meticulous. He thought he was doing God's work in rooting out Catharism. And so later, historians have been able to go over these volumes and explore the details. Now I think we need, and there's some terrible stuff going on. There's a brilliant quote, which I love. Two Cathars meet in Montaille, share a bit of bread, and one says to the other, "What's new in Pamiers?" And the other guy says, "Oh, they say the Antichrist is born. Everyone must put his soul in order. The end of the world is here." And the other one says, "I don't believe it. The world has neither beginning nor end. Let's go to bed." That's a discussion taking place in about 1294, and that was the point of heresy. The guy that said, "I don't believe that the world has neither beginning nor end," was what's called an eternalist. And that was a heresy. You have to believe the world has a beginning, God created it, and it has an end. The last judgment, God's going to destroy it. And to think it was an eternal thing is a heresy. Now, I've studied philosophy enough to know that Aristotle believed the same. He was an eternalist. And it's funny that all the academics in the universities of Europe were all Aristotelians, like Alet and stuff. So, they're all heretics. I think I'm an eternalist. I think this whole universe, I don't believe in the Big Bang. That makes me a heresy, fine. I think there's got to be another explanation. Like the Big Bang had to come from somewhere. There's got to be an eternal process of recycling of energy and gravity and light and spirit into some eternal process, like an ecological, sustainable model of the universe.
Can I interrupt you?
Go for it.
There's a scientist by the name of Bruce Gamer, Gamer,
Okay.
and he and two other scientists from the University of California, Santa Cruz, have discovered that in hot pools, and that could be interesting for here, in hot pools there are cells that dry out, and then when they are rehydrated, begin to form DNA. And that they are now thinking that this is how the world got formed. From hot pools that dried out, where the dried cells, atoms, just preserved themselves. And when they were rehydrated, when the water came back, they began to form the spirals of DNA. And that is really the source of everything that exists. And that research is brand new. Well, it's not brand new, it's a few years old. He's won lots of prizes. He's been on the fronts of magazines all over the U.S. and the world.
No, I thank you for that. I will make
Because it agrees with you.
Yeah. I mean, life is eternal too, because it's like a panspermia.
But that's exactly what they're saying.
Galaxies, it's seeded by. We've got to get over this, like, we're the only planet and the only God and the only. It's the ovaries that we have to combat. Anyway, so these Cathars were doing that, and I love them for it. Let's go to bed. The world's eternal. What a great guy.
Did you know that the Bishop of Pyrenees 4 years ago did a mass up on this?
I heard about the official apology. They need to amplify it and publicise it.
They do, but it's just interesting that it was the Bishop of Pyrenees that conducted the service. It's just
Did you go?
Ironically, I found myself there on that day, having not been there for a while. Yes.
And where was it? Where did it take
So
place?
it's in the church in Montsegur. So do you know Chloe and James? No. So Chloe, they have a house here, and they were staying with us whilst their house was being built. And we woke up one Sunday morning and we said, let's go up to Montsegur. Let's take the children and let's head back.
Right.
We got to Montsegur, roadblock, we couldn't get through, and it was because